Be me, Alex, mid-30s, veteran developer. Spent the better part of 10 years hopping from contract to contract, living the independent life. Pick up a project, architect it, deliver, invoice, repeat. No team-building retreats, no office gossip, no corporate theater. Just code and whatever technical mess needed untangling. It suited me. Clean transactions, clear expectations. Then the climate shifted. Fewer contracts floating around. Out of nowhere, a recruiter pitches a permanent role that's hard to ignore. Big salary, proper benefits, and a system on the brink of collapse. A sprawling enterprise platform, hemorrhaging money and stability. Exactly the kind of fire I've always preferred walking into. So I signed the papers and prepared to re-enter the world of cubicles and break room coffee. My first day was pretty standard. Filled out HR paperwork, got my laptop, met my new manager. The manager was a guy in his late 40s, looked perpetually tired. He gave me the rundown on the project, which was even worse than I'd imagined. He basically told me I had free rein to fix it. Just make the bleeding stop, Alex, was how he put it. Sounds good to me. I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to write clean code and refactor a dumpster fire. Then he walked me over to the Teams area. It was an open plan office, the kind that's supposed to foster collaboration, but really just fosters noise and distraction. I noticed the atmosphere was quiet. Not a productive, focused quiet. It was a tense, walking on eggshells quiet. The manager introduced me to the team, a handful of guys who all looked as tired as he did. They gave me weak handshakes and mumbled hellos. And then he introduced me to Morgan. She wasn't a developer. Her title was something vague like project coordinator or agile facilitator. She had that look, the one that combines supreme confidence with a deep-seated anger at everything. She didn't offer to shake my hand. She just sized me up and said my manager had forgotten to mention my pronouns. I must have looked at her blankly for a second. My manager jumped in looking nervous. Ah, yes, Morgan is our team's champion for creating a safe and inclusive workspace. Morgan smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I just said, I'm Alex, I'm here to fix the back end. The look she gave me could have curdled milk. I ignored it and found my assigned desk. The first few days were just me digging through the codebase, trying to make sense of the mess. I kept to myself, headphones on, mapping out the architecture and identifying the key failure points. The other guys on the team seemed almost afraid to talk to me, or to each other. Conversations were held in low murmurs. I figured out why pretty quickly. Every time a couple of the devs would start chatting, Morgan would magically appear. She'd stand near their desks, not saying anything, just listening with her arms crossed. The conversation would die out instantly. On my third day, I got the first email. The subject line was, "A friendly reminder on inclusive communication." It was from Morgan, sent to the entire team. It was a long list of problematic words and their inclusive alternatives. Don't say guys, say folks, or team. Don't say manpower, say human effort. Don't say sanity check, say quick check or confidence check. The list went on and on. It was absurd. I read it, archived it, and went back to my work. A few hours later, I saw it in action. One of the junior devs, a young kid who looked permanently scared, posted a question in the team chat. Hey guys, is anyone else having trouble connecting to the staging server? Less than a minute later, a reply from Morgan, @JuniorDev. A gentle reminder that we use gender-neutral language here. Folks or team is preferred. The poor kid immediately deleted his message and reposted it. Hey folks, is anyone else having trouble connecting to the staging server? No one answered his question for 20 minutes. I sighed, typed, yeah, the firewall rules were updated. Use the new VPN profile. I just pushed the config file to the repo and hit enter. A few seconds later, I got a direct message from the junior dev. Thanks man, seriously. I just replied with a thumbs up emoji. The next week was the first big team meeting about the project. I was ready. I had a full presentation on the systemic issues, a roadmap for the refactor, and a list of immediate priorities. We all gathered in the conference room. I was expecting to jump right in, but Morgan had other ideas. She stood at the front of the room and announced that we would start the meeting, as always, by checking in and going around the room to state our names and pronouns. I watched in a state of mild disbelief as each person, from the tired manager to the scared junior dev, dutifully recited their name and he/him. It was the most surreal, pointless ritual I had ever witnessed in a professional setting. The energy in the room was zero. It felt like a re-education camp. Then it was my turn. Everyone looked at me. Morgan was staring intently, like a predator waiting for its prey to make a wrong move. I just said, "I'm Alex. The primary issue is the cascading failure in the message queue service. It's causing a deadlock in the database. I have a plan to fix it." I turned to the monitor, plugged in my laptop, and pulled up my presentation. The silence was heavy. I could feel Morgan's glare on the side of my face. I completely ignored it and started walking the team through the technical details. I kept it professional, purely focused on the work. After a few minutes, the other devs started to engage. They asked smart questions. We started whiteboarding solutions. For about 45 minutes, it felt like a real engineering meeting. We were productive. But Morgan sat in the corner, silent, radiating pure rage. The moment the technical discussion ended, she pounced. She said that while the technical talk was interesting, she was deeply concerned about my refusal to participate in the team's safety protocols. She claimed that my actions created an environment where people might not feel psychologically safe to share their full selves. My manager shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The other guys just stared at the table. I packed up my laptop. "My job is to ensure the system is safe and stable," I said, looking directly at my manager. "The project is 2 months behind schedule and losing money every day. My focus is on fixing that. Is there anything else?" The manager, seeing an out, quickly said, "No, that's all. Great work, Alex. Let's get on that." I nodded and left the room. I knew this was far from over. Later that day, I got a calendar invite from Morgan. Title, "Chat about team dynamics." I declined it. A minute later, she walked over to my desk. I had my headphones on and was deep in concentration. She tapped on my shoulder. I took one earbud out. "Yes? Did you get my invite?" "I did. I'm a bit busy trying to prevent a multi-million-dollar system from collapsing. Can this be an email?" She was not happy. Her voice was low and tight. "This is important. It's about your integration into the team culture." "My integration is going fine," I said, putting my earbud back in. "The code is getting better. That's my integration." I turned back to my screen. I could feel her standing there for another 30 seconds before she stormed off. The next level of escalation came via my manager. He called me into his office at the end of the day. He looked even more tired than usual. He told me that Morgan had come to him, very upset. She had apparently accused me of hostile and dismissive behavior. I just sat there and listened. My manager sighed. "Look, Alex, I know this is a lot. Morgan is very passionate about these things. The higher-ups listen to her. It's just easier for everyone if we play along. Could you just do the pronoun thing next time, just to keep the peace?" I thought about it for a moment. "Does my contract require me to participate in rituals that have nothing to do with my job description?" I asked. He blinked. "Well, no, not explicitly, but is my refusal to do so impacting my ability to deliver on the project?" "No, your work is incredible. You've done more in 2 weeks than the whole team did in the last quarter." "Then I don't see the problem," I said. "The problem isn't me. The problem is a project coordinator who is spending her time policing language instead of coordinating the project. The project is a mess, partly because the team is terrified of speaking up. My only concern is fixing the technical debt." My manager just rubbed his face. "Okay, Alex, just try not to antagonize her." I told him I wasn't antagonizing anyone. I was just working. The quiet war continued. Morgan started trying to undermine me in subtle ways. She'd forget to add me to email chains about minor requirement changes. I'd find out when I saw the changes in the ticketing system. It didn't matter. I always read the tickets directly anyway. She'd schedule ideation sessions and synergy workshops during times I had blocked out for deep work focus. I would decline the invites every single time. The most blatant attempt was when she tried to implement a new communications protocol. She sent out a document, a 10-page manifesto, detailing how all technical discussions should be framed. It included things like, before critiquing a colleague's code, first state 3 things you admire about it, and Avoid using absolute or certain language, such as, "this is wrong." Instead, use collaborative phrasing like, "I'm wondering if there's another way to approach this that might address." It was a recipe for complete inefficiency. A guide on how to talk for an hour without saying anything. I ignored the document completely. During the next code review session, which Morgan had started attending to observe and facilitate, I pointed out a critical flaw in a piece of code. "This approach won't work," I said, pointing at the screen. "It creates a race condition that will corrupt the data. We need to use a transactional lock here. It's a simple fix." Morgan immediately interjected. "Alex, let's refer to our communication protocol. How could we phrase that in a more constructive and less confrontational way?" The developer who wrote the code was looking at me, waiting. I turned to Morgan. "The most constructive way to phrase this is the way that is clearest and prevents catastrophic data loss. 'This is wrong, and here's how to fix it' is clear, fast, and effective. We are engineers, not poets. Now, about that transactional lock." I turned back to the developer, and we spent the next 5 minutes working out the solution. Morgan was fuming. She sat through the rest of the meeting with her laptop open, typing furiously. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was documenting my transgressions. But something interesting was starting to happen. The other male developers were starting to change, slowly. At first it was small things. One of them, Mark, a senior guy who was actually quite good but had been beaten into submission, sent me a DM. "Good on you for pushing back on that protocol nonsense. It's been slowing us down for months." Then, in a meeting, another developer, David, used the phrase "sanity check." He immediately flinched, looking over at Morgan. She started to open her mouth, but I jumped in with a technical question related to his point, completely derailing her attempt to correct him. I kept the conversation focused on the work. David shot me a grateful look. It was like they were seeing that her power wasn't real. It was a bluff, and I was calling it just by doing my job. They started coming to my desk directly with questions, bypassing the chat where Morgan was always watching. Our corner of the office became an island of quiet productivity. Morgan noticed, of course. Her inability to control me was making her more and more erratic. She knew she couldn't attack my work, because my results were undeniable. The project was stabilizing for the first time in a year. The graphs were all pointing up. I was closing tickets, fixing bugs, and deploying stable code. So, she had to attack my character. Her new obsession became toxic masculinity. She started dropping the phrase in meetings. We need to be aware of how toxic masculinity can manifest in the tech space, such as through aggressive communication styles or a refusal to engage with emotional labor. It was always directed at me, but she never used my name. Everyone knew who she was talking about. I never reacted. I'd just wait for her to finish her little speech and then say, "Okay, so, about the caching layer issue," my complete and total indifference was driving her up the wall. It's not that I was trying to be a jerk. It's just that, in my world, the only things that matter are logic, data, and results. Her entire worldview was based on feelings, symbolism, and power plays. They were two fundamentally incompatible operating systems. The situation came to a head a few weeks later. We had a major deadline. A critical patch needed to be deployed over the weekend. It was a big job. I had told my manager that I would lead the deployment, and I'd need 1 or 2 other developers to help. Mark and David immediately volunteered. We planned to work on Saturday. On Friday afternoon, Morgan sent out a meeting invite for 10 a.m. on Saturday. Title: Weekend Workshop, Unpacking Male Privilege in the Workplace. It was mandatory for all male members of the team. She had CC'd the head of our department and someone from HR. This was a direct, undeniable attack. She was trying to sabotage the deployment. Mark and David came over to my desk, looking panicked. "We have to go to this, right? She CC'd HR. I looked at the invite. It was a masterclass in corporate passive aggression. The description was full of buzzwords about building a braver, more equitable team. I knew this was her checkmate move. If I skipped it, she would have a documented case of me defying a mandatory HR-supported event. If I went, the deployment would be delayed, the deadline would be missed, and it would reflect badly on me as the technical lead. She could then argue that my divisive attitude was harming project delivery. It was a clever trap. I looked at Mark and David. "The deployment starts at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'll see you then. Bring coffee." I opened the calendar invite. I clicked decline. And in the optional message box, I typed a single sentence. I am unavailable due to a business-critical production deployment scheduled at the request of management. Then I CC'd my manager and the department head. The ball was in their court now. I worked late that night, preparing everything for the morning. As I was packing up to leave, my manager rushed over to me. He was practically vibrating with anxiety. "Alex, what did you do? I'm getting emails from HR. Morgan is saying you're refusing a mandatory diversity and inclusion training." "I'm not refusing anything," I said calmly. "I'm prioritizing the multi-million-dollar project you tasked me with saving. The deployment window is this weekend. Her workshop, which has no relevance to our project, was scheduled on top of it without any consultation. I have made the logical choice." "But HR," he stammered. "Are you, as my manager, ordering me to abandon the deployment and attend the workshop instead?" I asked him directly. He froze. He knew he couldn't do that. If the deployment failed because he prioritized a nonsense workshop, the department head would have his hide. "Just fix the deployment," he finally mumbled. "I'll handle HR. I'll handle Morgan." I knew he wouldn't, not really. But he had given me the green light. The next morning, I met Mark and David at the office. The place was a ghost town, except for us. We got to work. At exactly 10 a.m., my phone started buzzing. It was a call from the conference room number. Morgan, I sent it to voicemail. A few minutes later, an email. Subject, urgent, mandatory meeting. Body, Alex, Mark, David, your presence is required in conference room B immediately. I showed it to the other two. Mark looked nervous. David just shook his head and smirked. "Guess we're not on her good list," he said. We ignored it and kept working. The deployment was complex, and we needed to focus. Around 11 a.m., she appeared in the doorway of our work area. She was holding her phone up, clearly recording us. "I want it on record that you are all willfully defying a mandatory company event," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "This is an extreme act of insubordination." I didn't even look up from my monitor. "Morgan, you are creating a distraction during a critical production deployment. I need you to leave," I said, my eyes still on the screen. "You don't get to tell me what to do. This is a hostile work environment," she shrieked. David finally looked up. "The only hostile thing here is you, pointing a phone in our faces while we're trying to work. Get out." That was a new one. I'd never heard any of them speak to her like that. She was momentarily stunned into silence. She glared at us, then stormed off, still recording. We got back to work. The rest of the deployment went smoothly. We finished around 4 p.m. We monitored the system for a couple of hours. Everything was stable. Better than stable, it was faster and more reliable than it had ever been. It was a massive success. We packed up, feeling pretty good about ourselves. As we were leaving, Mark said, "You know we're all getting fired on Monday, right?" I just smiled. Let her try. I had a feeling the game was about to change. She had overplayed her hand. This wasn't about pronouns or safe spaces anymore. This was about her trying to intentionally sabotage a critical project to win a power struggle. And I had a feeling that was a line that even a cowardly management team wouldn't let her cross. I went home and didn't think about it again for the rest of the weekend. What was done was done. Monday morning arrived. I got to the office at my usual time. The air in our section was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark and David were already at their desks, but they weren't working. They were just staring at their screens, nursing coffees like they were life rafts. They both looked up when I walked in. The expressions on their faces were a mixture of fear and a strange sort of defiant camaraderie. I gave them a nod, dropped my bag at my desk, and went to get a coffee. Morgan's desk was empty. This was unusual. She was normally one of the first people in, eager to begin her day of policing the office. Her absence was more ominous than her presence would have been. The rest of the team trickled in, and everyone could feel it. The tension was palpable. No one was talking. The only sound was the quiet clatter of keyboards. Around 9:30 a.m., the email landed in our inboxes. It was from my manager. Subject, Project Omega Follow-Up. The body was short and to the point. "Alex, Mark, David, please come to the main conference room on the 4th floor. Mr. Harrison would like to discuss the weekend's events." Mr. Harrison, that was the department head, the big boss. My manager had also been CC'd, along with a name I recognized as the head of HR. This was it, the main event. Mark let out a low groan. David just shook his head and closed his laptop with a sigh. "Well, it's been nice knowing you guys," Mark said, trying for a joke that didn't land. "Let's go," I said. "No sense in delaying it." We walked to the elevator in silence. It was like a procession to the gallows. The fourth floor was executive territory, carpeted, quiet, with expensive-looking art on the walls. We got to the main conference room. The door was closed. I knocked, and my manager's voice told us to come in. We stepped inside. It was exactly as I had pictured. A long, polished table. At the far end sat Mr. Harrison, the department head. He was an older guy, maybe early 60s, with a reputation for being ruthless when it came to business, but fair. Beside him was the head of HR, a woman in her 50s who looked serious and professional. My own manager was sitting a few seats down, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. And across from them, sitting bolt upright with a folder of papers in front of her, was Morgan. She had a look of triumphant vindication on her face. She thought she had already won. There were 3 empty chairs on our side of the table. We sat down. Mr. Harrison started things off. His voice was calm and even. "Thank you for coming in. I've received a very serious report from Ms. Morgan regarding a number of incidents, culminating in events that took place this past Saturday. She has made some grave accusations. We are here to understand what happened." He nodded to Morgan. "Morgan, please summarize your complaint for us." She took a deep breath, clearly relishing the moment. She opened her folder and began. It was a prepared speech. She spoke for nearly 15 minutes, detailing my entire tenure at the company from her perspective. She painted a picture of me as a rogue element, a disruptive force of toxic masculinity. She listed my transgressions one by one. My refusal to state pronouns, which created an unsafe and exclusionary environment. My dismissal of her attempts to foster team cohesion. My use of aggressive and confrontational language during code reviews. My consistent and willful ignoring of the team's communication protocols. It was a masterwork of corporate buzzword bingo. She then got to the weekend. "This pattern of behavior," she said, her voice filled with fake emotion, "reached its peak this past weekend. I organized a mandatory workshop to address the growing issues of male privilege and unconscious bias on our team. An event, I might add, that was supported by HR." She paused for dramatic effect. Alex, Mark, and David not only refused to attend, they did so in a coordinated act of defiance. When I went to remind them of their obligation, they were hostile. They verbally attacked me. I was forced to leave for my own safety. I have video evidence of their aggression. She held up her phone. Their insubordination directly sabotaged a critical company-approved D&I initiative. Their behavior is unacceptable and has created a toxic environment that is actively hostile to women. I am formally requesting their immediate termination for gross misconduct. She sat back, looking incredibly pleased with herself. Mr. Harrison looked at the phone in her hand, then at us. His face was unreadable. "Thank you, Morgan," he said. He then turned to my manager. "What is your perspective on this? You are their direct supervisor." My manager squirmed. This was his nightmare. "Well, Morgan is very dedicated to our team's culture," he began, trying to play both sides. "And it's true that Alex is very direct, but his work on Project Omega has been exemplary. The weekend deployment was a major success. He was trying so hard not to take a side that he was effectively useless." Mr. Harrison looked unimpressed. He finally turned his gaze to me. "Alex, what do you have to say in response to these accusations?" The entire room was silent. Morgan was smirking. I hadn't brought a folder. I hadn't prepared a speech. I just had the facts. "Mr. Harrison," I started, keeping my voice level, "I was hired to solve a problem. The problem was Project Omega. When I started 6 weeks ago, the project was 3 months behind schedule, 40% over budget, and suffering from daily critical system failures. It was, and I'm quoting from your own internal audit, a 5-alarm fire." I saw a flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. He knew the numbers. "My focus from day one has been on extinguishing that fire. I have worked to simplify the code base, fix the core architectural flaws, and increase system stability. That has been my sole and entire priority," I continued. "The transgressions Morgan listed are all examples of one thing: me prioritizing my work over activities that do not contribute to the project's success. I did not state my pronouns because it's not relevant to my ability to write code. I declined meeting invites for synergy workshops because my time was better spent debugging a memory leak that was costing this company an estimated $10,000 an hour. The HR head was starting to take notes. Morgan's smirk was gone. Regarding the communication protocol, I went on, it actively discouraged clear and direct feedback among engineers. In our profession, ambiguity can lead to catastrophic errors. Stating, "This code is wrong and will cause data corruption," is not aggressive. It is a necessary and precise statement of fact meant to protect the business. Softening that language to protect feelings puts the project at risk. I paused for a second, then looked directly at Morgan. Now, regarding this weekend, I was tasked by my manager to lead a critical deployment. This was the most significant patch we have deployed to date. It was meant to solve the core stability issues that have plagued the system for a year. The deployment required a full day of focused work and had to be done on a Saturday to minimize customer impact. Mark and David volunteered their weekend to assist. I turned back to Mr. Harrison. On Friday afternoon, Morgan scheduled a mandatory workshop on top of this pre-planned business-critical work. She did not consult me or my manager. She made no effort to find an alternative time. Her workshop had no relevance to the immediate needs of the business. The deployment, on the other hand, was mission critical. I leaned forward slightly. I was faced with a choice: attend her workshop and allow the project to be delayed, costing the company hundreds of thousands of dollars and missing a crucial deadline, or do the job I was hired to do. I did the job. We successfully completed the deployment. As of this morning, system uptime is at 99.99%. Transaction speed has increased by 200%, and we have had 0 critical errors for 36 hours straight. That is a first in this project's history. I let that sink in. When Morgan came to harass us during the deployment, she was not reminding us of an obligation. She was actively distracting a team of engineers during a sensitive operation. Her behavior was unprofessional and reckless. The video she took will not show us being aggressive. It will show us at our desks working, while she stands in the doorway shouting at us. It is evidence of her harassing us, not the other way around. I sat back. I have no further statement. My work speaks for itself. The room was dead silent for what felt like an eternity. Mark and David were looking at me with wide eyes. My manager was staring at his hands. Morgan was pale. All the triumphant energy had drained out of her. Mr. Harrison finally broke the silence. He turned to the head of HR. "Is it company policy for one employee to film another without their consent?" The HR head shook her head. "No. It is a serious violation of our privacy and respect in the workplace policies." Mr. Harrison then turned to Morgan. "Morgan, I find your actions deeply disturbing. You seem to have appointed yourself as a sort of ideological enforcer for your team, wasting countless hours on policing language instead of doing your job, which is to coordinate projects." His voice was getting colder with every word. "This weekend, you took it a step further. You attempted to use a D&I initiative as a weapon to sabotage a critical business operation. You deliberately tried to force my lead engineer to fail, presumably so you could prove a point. You then harassed him and his team while they were working and filmed them in an attempt to create a false narrative." He looked at her folder of papers with disgust. "This company values diversity and inclusion, but we do not tolerate it being used as a shield for personal vendettas and corporate sabotage. Your behavior is the most toxic thing I have seen in this department in a long time." He looked at the HR head. "She's fired. Effective immediately. Escort her from the building." Morgan's jaw dropped. She started to stammer. "You can't do this. I'll sue. This is retaliation." The HR head stood up. "Morgan, your actions, including an attempt to sabotage a major project and filming your colleagues, constitute gross misconduct. I suggest you collect your personal belongings quietly." 2 security guards, who must have been waiting outside, entered the room. The whole thing was surreal. Morgan, who had wielded so much power through threats and intimidation, just deflated. She was escorted out of the room without another word. After she was gone, Mr. Harrison turned to my manager. "And you," he said, his voice dripping with disappointment. "You let this happen. You were so afraid of a single employee that you allowed your entire team to be terrorized and your project to nearly collapse. We'll be having a separate conversation about your future here. My manager just nodded, looking utterly defeated. Finally, Mr. Harrison looked at me, Mark, and David. His entire demeanor changed. He almost smiled. Gentlemen, that was a textbook example of professionalism under pressure. You put the needs of the business first, you ignored the drama, and you delivered spectacular results. I've seen the performance reports from this morning. You didn't just save the project, you've set a new standard for it. He stood up and actually walked over and shook our hands. Thank you. Now, get back to work, and let me know what resources you need to keep this momentum going. We walked out of that conference room in a daze. As soon as the door closed behind us, Mark let out a breath he'd probably been holding for a year. David was actually laughing. We got back to our section of the office. Word had apparently already spread. Morgan's desk was being cleared out by security. People were looking at us, not with fear, but with respect. The junior dev, the kid who was always so scared, came over to my desk. Hey man, Alex, what you did, that was awesome, thank you. It was like a dam had broken. The office wasn't quiet anymore. People started talking to each other, about work, about the weekend, about nothing. The oppressive tension that had choked the place for so long was just gone. In the afternoon team chat, someone asked a question and started it with, "Hey guys," and nobody batted an eye. It felt normal. It felt healthy. My manager spent the rest of the day in meetings with HR and was gone by the end of the week. A new manager was brought in, a former engineer who actually understood our work. The change was incredible. Productivity skyrocketed. People weren't afraid to speak their minds or challenge ideas anymore. Our meetings became shorter and more effective. We started hitting all our deadlines and then exceeding them. The team actually became a team. I never set out to be a crusader. I never wanted to be a hero. I'm just a guy who wants to show up, do good work, solve hard problems, and go home. I refused to play a game that was rigged, and in doing so, I had accidentally shown everyone else that they could refuse to play too. A few weeks later, after a particularly successful release, the whole team went out for drinks. It was the first time they had done anything like that in years. Mark raised his glass. "A toast," he said, looking at me. "To Alex, the guy who reminded us that we're paid to write code, not to walk on eggshells." Everyone cheered. I just took a sip of my beer. The work was good. The system was stable. The drama was gone. It was perfect.